Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the FileMaker Pro user group, Dallas, Texas. I'm Taylor Sharpe. Today, we're ready for another exciting meeting that we're going to do today. We're glad to have everybody here, including those that are online virtually. Welcome. If you're a FileMaker developer, we have coming up Elevate FM in Toronto. That's coming up in early June. They're still taking RSVPs, so if you're interested in going up there, it's a nice time of year to be up there. And Heather is going to be speaking at their conference. What's your topic going to be, Heather?
UX, user stories to delivery.
User stories to delivery, all about the US experience.
It's a tool to manage your UX.
Okay, I'm sure that'll be exciting. So if you got some budget for travel, there's a good one there. Vienna Calling is great if you got money to travel all the way to Europe. That's at the end of this month. And then the other conference that's happening this summer is Full Access. Full Access is basically the continuation of the Pause on Air type series of conferences. That's a small conference. There are probably, 50 to 100 people there, so it's not real big. The nice thing about it is it's right next to the Claris headquarters, so we're going to have a number of Claris people there. Rick Calman will be there. Clay Makel will be there, so you can talk with some of them as well as some of the other engineers. Last year, Ryan even showed up, so we got to hear some of the inside stuff that's going on, but it should be an interesting time. I'm going to be there, and I'm really looking forward to it. Let's cue Rick Calman on Full Access.
Hello, I'm Rick Calman. I work for Claris as a platform evangelist. You may also know me from my previous role as a product manager at Claris for over 20 years, focusing on FileMaker. And I want to talk a little bit about why I'm going to the Full Access conference. Last year's conference, it was a fantastic experience. The content, the facility, the location, the food, the people, it was all combined. It was so very memorable that I definitely want to make my way back to it this year. Oftentimes in my days, I think back to that conference. So it was really pleasurable and unique in that sense. Regarding the possibility of me speaking and having a session there, at the moment, I'm not planning a session, but it's still early and you never know. We've got some stuff up our sleeve that's probably going to be worth talking about. So it may be me talking or certainly someone else from Claris, but stay tuned there. And finally, regarding what I hope to get out of this conference, one of the things I've always loved about going to FileMaker conferences over the last 25 years, especially as an employee, is to learn what our developers are doing with the features we put in the product. Often we're completely blown away. We'd put a feature in and then say, oh my gosh, that's clever. Never even thought about that use case. I always found it to be extremely valuable for me, especially as a product manager, but now as a platform evangelist, to have that full circle of we put things in the product for developers to take advantage of, and then we see what they're building and we get blown away and we get inspired. And then we just continue on that sort of virtuous cycle. Yeah, it's one of my, if not my favorite conference to go to. Just thoroughly enjoyable. And I'm looking forward to it again. Thank you very much.
On another FileMaker topic, if you haven't been aware, just recently they've released FileMaker Server 22.0.6. If you're big into the security end of things, it fixes one of the national vulnerabilities database CVEs, and Tomcat is fixed, so it's an important security update. It's a free update, so upgrade your FileMaker servers to 22.0.6. So next we're going to have up Zerowait is going to come up. They're our sponsor. We very much appreciate them, and they also are the hardware experts. If you're like me, you're more of a software guy, FileMaker development, but you got to have hardware. Stuff has to reside somewhere and needs to be reliable. We're going to have Cris come up here and tell us about Zerowait.
Thanks for having us in today. My name is Cris Mire, and I'm the engineering manager at Zerowait. I've been with the company since 2013. So FileMaker has been a critical part of our infrastructure since 2004, and like most companies, we've been running VMware for quite some time. After Broadcom's acquisition of VMware and the ensuing insanity around the new licensing model, we decided to make a change to our virtual environment. We eventually settled on Proxmox as a replacement for our VMware infrastructure. I could give you a bunch of sales and marketing stuff, but I'm an engineer, so I'm just going to give it to you straight. We built an enterprise virtual environment at a fraction of the cost of licensing VMware. There's no cost to download and install Proxmox. And for those that want enterprise services and support, there are several options to choose from, licensed by socket, and average about 80 to 90% less than VMware. Now, I can tell you honestly, as a guy who's building and supporting the environment, our Proxmox solutions are super easy to install and manage. And I haven't even gotten to some of the features that should excite every administrator, developer, and integrator on the planet. Since I've only got a couple of minutes, I'll give you my favorite Proxmox feature, snapshots with ZFS. Check this out. Click a couple of buttons and you've created a ZFS pool to store your virtual machines. Now, regardless of the operating system, Windows, Unix, it doesn't matter. Now you can create a snapshot, live, that preserves the system and application state. That snapshot allows you to recover the entire operating system and applications like FileMaker and the associated databases. Everything just as they were at the time of the snapshot. The snapshot functionality is integrated into Proxmox, so it's not an additional feature you have to pay extra for, and it protects you against corruption, failed updates, programming errors, and even ransomware attacks. So, if you're ready to upgrade your FileMaker experience to something that makes everyone's lives better, give us a call at 302-996-9408 or email us at sales@zerowait.com to schedule a free upgrade evaluation.
Okay, welcome. We're excited to have our presentation get going here. Today, we have all the way from Colorado, Dennis Burnham with ASNAP and Business Burnham Development. He used to be one of our chapter coordinators here until he moved from Dallas up to the great state of Colorado, where they ski and snowboard and all those fun things. But we're glad to have Dennis back. He's got a very long history of experience with FileMaker and FileMaker development. Dennis, come up here and educate us.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here and thank you for tuning in from out of town. I'm Dennis Burnham and I'm here to show you a really wonderful SMS messaging app that I discovered a few months ago. And I'm going to start by showing you ClickSend. ClickSend is about integrating text messaging with any of your FileMaker applications. I started exploring this many years ago when I had a client who wanted to integrate text messaging. And the first thing to warn you about is that my father told me when I was a kid, there's nothing in life that's free. Everything has a price to it. So if you wanted to send text messages and you didn't want to subscribe to any kind of a service to do it, and you just wanted to use the send mail function in FileMaker, you could do that as long as you know what the correct format is, and it changes with every service provider who provides cell service to your phone. You certainly don't want to ask people in advance, so it's not a really practical way to do it, but it does exist. The thing that I developed that I'm showing you today is now in the Claris Marketplace, and it's called ClickSend Integrator. There's also a way to send text messaging through Claris Connect if you were using Twilio. I'm not a user of Claris Connect because my license doesn't allow me to begin to use Claris Studio or Claris Connect, so I was on the hunt for something that I could work with. I had a little bit of experience in the past with Twilio. I also experimented with something called FMSMS, which is a database that gives you a long list of different providers of SMS messaging and how to sign up for any of them. That wasn't really of interest to me. My experience with Twilio is one that I'll share with you. It's a bad one. I don't mind that this is recorded and people might hear about it. In 2012, I began working with an API, and I admit that I really was a novice and I couldn't get it to work at all. I put $20 into the Twilio account, and what I didn't know was that when I'm not using their service and they take $3 a month out of my account, got to the point where it was zero, and then they kept taking $3 out. So when I went back to them a few months ago, they told me that I owed them, what does it say, $78.68. And my attitude was, that's bizarre. I don't want to pay you a hostage fee to come back to you. You got $20 of my money. I never sent a single message. Reset it to 0 and let me begin working with you. The answer was no, we don't do things that way. So I went on the hunt and I found in Australia a wonderful company called ClickSend. And that's what I'm going to be showing you. The app that I built begins with a simple master detail layout that has 21 steps in it as a tutorial, so you can go through it one after the other to just get a little illustrated explanation of what the different features are. The second table is a simple message log, so I can keep track of the outgoing messages. And then I have a panel that's called settings, where in this case, because we're being recorded, I have not shown my particular settings, otherwise anybody may be able to use my account. But I also included in the settings a portal with a table of all the country codes in the world, so that you would know the correct prefix of any phone number that you were going to send to. And I included a list of all those mobile phone carriers that I mentioned a moment ago. So if you really wanted to just send a quick message to somebody, and let's say you knew that they were on AT&T, you'd be able to format a message to them. There's a referral code that you're welcome to use if you want to sign up with ClickSend. Signing up is really easy, user-friendly. They give you, without charging you anything, $2 to play with. So if a typical message is less than 2 cents, you can get 100 or so messages out without spending any real money. And they give you 14 days to play with it. One of the best things that I can tell you about ClickSend is that they have AI-supported chat that actually works. And all you have to do is type into the chat, I think the words are, connect me with an agent, or I want to speak to an agent. And within seconds or minutes at the worst, you get an English-speaking representative who understands what you want and gives you real good, sensible answers. Everything is fully documented. What made it work for me was that they had a customer in the UK who gave them a PDF printout of a FileMaker script. And there was one element in that script that I'll show you later, which made the difference between success or failure. And the bottom line is it made it possible for me to give you, in this app that I made, that script. So all you have to do is fill in the blanks for your account number, and you'll be able to immediately send messages by connecting the app to, let's say, a table of customers or a table of contacts or a table of friends, whatever you need. In the marketplace, it's hard to find. And I think it's because Claris is so enamored with AI that they forgot about perform find. So if you type the word click into the search field, you get 7 results and none of them match ClickSend Integrator. If you type the word message, you'll get 12 results and none of them match ClickSend Integrator. If you type the word SMS, you get 9 results, and ClickSend Integrator is the 4th one in the list. And if you type the whole word ClickSend Integrator, then it's first in the list, and there are 123 other things that probably all have the word integration as part of their app name. So you can download that from the App Store, and you can use the partner code I showed you. So that concludes what I have to say about ClickSend. I can do a live demo for you in a little while if necessary, but I have these 20 tips and tricks. Many of these are simple. Many of them are probably known to some of you, but I mention it just in case. You never know that somebody has never heard of this before. So my first one is Text Expander. There are many alternatives to it. I find it inexpensive and easy, and I've got a long list of things that I don't have to type out when I'm writing scripts or calculations that just extend the complete expressions. For example, one that I use all the time when I'm putting up a show custom dialog is that it's followed by get last message choice. So all I do is type GLMC and I get last message choice. So I'm a big advocate of Text Expander for working with FileMaker. Originally, years ago in 2018, a gentleman who works for Goya in Australia published something in the community for creating default fields. And default fields have changed a bit over the years, but this still works, and I'm able to put this into not the chat today, but I'll make sure that Fred gets it from me for anybody who wants to use it. It's just a simple way to create the default fields that you want to have in whatever version of FileMaker you're using. And if you notice along the top row where it says FMP directory, by just specifying those 3 fields and the version number, you'll get the correctly named default fields XML file. I created a custom function that I abbreviate with the letters DV, and all it is a simple way of making objects on layouts visible only to full access developers. So many times I need to see fields that my customers don't need to see, and very rarely do I have a customer who has full access privilege set, and just by putting the letters DV in the hide field, I'm able to see it, sometimes color it in a way to make sure that I know what I'm looking at. I created a small database of keyboard types because they're available for you to reference, but I just like to be able to pull it up immediately. I have a hard time remembering what's the difference between number and punctuation or number keypad or numeric 10 key. This gives me a very easy visual way to keep it handy. I also keep a little snapshot of a spreadsheet on my desktop because I want to remember the system platforms and the device numbers. I discovered recently working with a client who had Android devices that there's actually a device number 6, which applies on Androids when the user is in desktop mode. Never knew that before, but now it's a reminder to me that if I'm doing anything for use on Android phones, I got to beware of capturing the device number 6 when somebody logs in. This is one that I think I learned here at FMPug years ago, and it's a way to identify what a particular value list is used for. So if you type the description of it in the custom values field and then switch afterward to use values from field or use values from another file, you still have a way to remind yourself of what that value list was made for, how to get a hold of it, and maybe the screenshot that I made here shows how I can define a value list to be dependent on different table occurrences. One of the things that I have submitted as an idea to the ETS and partner community is the idea of giving us another value list option, which would be to define a value list by calculation, so that you could use execute SQL, for instance. And what I've proposed to them, hopefully it'll show up in a version in the future, is that you'd be able to have a miniature version of the data viewer in your value list definition. So you could compose it and then you could see the result right beside it the way you do with the data viewer. Cross your fingers for that one. This is a trick that I use when I'm doing layout work and there's an object that I want to get out of the way. I don't want to move it up or down in the stacking order of objects. I just want it to be out of my way for a while, and hiding it isn't necessarily the best thing to do because sometimes I'm in browse mode. So I just look in my position and I add 1,000. Or actually I'm adding 100 to whatever is the left position. And that pushes it way off to the right, and it's out of my way, and it's very easy to remember what it was before when I want to put it back. Making round buttons is a favorite of mine, and it's a very simple thing to do. You just take a measurement of the width and the radius, and as long as your radius is half the width of the object, you can make the boundaries of that button circular. I'm a big advocate of using new windows instead of go to layout or go to related record, because the advantage of doing this is that you don't lose the context of where you began. You may have a found set, and in the other window you may be adding records or deleting records. When you come back to your original layout, you're where you want to be without any changes. I don't know why this remains something in FileMaker. I've pointed it out about a decade ago. Get window name and set window title are the same thing. Why it's called window name in one place and window title in another, I don't know, but it must be like the today function that they can't really easily make a change to it when people have so many scripts that are using these steps. I encountered the location function a year ago when I was building the mobile app for full access, and I found that it was particularly difficult to test get location when it only works on iOS devices. So if you're trying to figure out, let's say, the location we are at right now and get the GPS coordinates of it, you can do it with a web viewer. If your web viewer is showing you Google Maps, you can identify the particular GPS location of any point and trust that will work properly in iOS. I've made custom functions for centering that I use anytime I want a window to be dead center in a display. So my abbreviations for it are very simple: CW and CH, center height, center width, and it just uses simple arithmetic to make sure that whenever the window opens or whenever somebody opens the app, it's not wherever the window was left the last time they used it, it's where you want it to be. This works beautifully in custom dialogues in iOS, and it works in WebDirect, and maybe someday it'll also work in FileMaker Pro, but for the time being, I'm using these custom functions. Now this is one that I rehearsed last night with Taylor to make sure that it had everything in it that I wanted you to know. In any app that I'm making for a customer, I want to use their SMTP settings, their host, their login, their password, and so forth. So somewhere I've got a table that's universally found throughout the database, and I make a repeat field that's got 8 repetitions in it. And then the trick that I want to see in working in browse mode is I want to see the placeholder text. So I'm using a function that you may or may not have ever seen before. It's called get calculation repetition number. And that allows me to specify what I want the placeholder text to be in each of those repetitions, each of the 8 repetitions in that particular field. Then when it's time to write the script, there are several ways that you can do it. The most difficult way is just to specify the field name by spelling it out completely with its table occurrence and name. Then I put a script in where I'm checking to see, do I have running a global variable with the $$ SMTP? If it's not active at the moment, it'll run a script that sets those values, and then I can go ahead and send the mail. If it's already present because I used it in a previous operation, then I don't have to run that perform script step. I can either use the double variable SMTP with its repetition numbers in the script step for send mail by server, or I can specify it using JSON, either way. But it saves a lot of the entry time. Tab stop headers are a favorite of mine when I'm doing something that uses a, what's the word?
Columns.
Help me, Heather.
Header.
A virtual list. Sorry, I blanked on that. I knew you would know. But when you're making a virtual list and you're putting it into a text object or a text field, I want to have the position of the different fields consistent. It's really difficult if you're using the FileMaker menu to navigate down into the tabs panel, but if you're using the inspector, it's always present and easy to get to. And it just helps to arrange the text that you have created in your virtual list. Another app that I found in the community many years ago that I love is this App Maker. It is designed so that you can make a custom icon that goes on the desktop of an iOS device, iPad or iPhone. And I love it because my customers cannot figure out how to work with FileMaker Go to identify the host name and the file name and put it into their favorites, and it's just clumsy for them. This way, if they have this icon installed as a profile on their device, they can tap it and it gets them right into the database. I'm a big user, because I'm on a Mac, of the emoji things that are in the keyboard. So very often there's a check mark or an arrow or something that's more attractive than what I might find in the button list of object logos and icons. So I can get more things that I need from that keyboard panel. If you ever clear the cache of in your library for FileMaker, you will lose your host list. And I find that to be annoying, because we don't travel as much as we used to now that we do things virtually. But it used to be the case for me that if I went on site to a client, I didn't want to have to look like a fool asking the IT department, what's your IP address or what's your host name? And this way, if I kept it in my laptop, I knew that on arrival, I'd be able to do what I needed to do to log in. So I preserved that host list by just taking screenshots of it. And I found that where it's kept is in this directory that I'm showing you, but I'm careful about ever clearing all of the contents of that cache folder. In your layout mode, there are 3 sections for fonts. I've covered this before in a session we did years ago about design. The very top one shows you the selected or most recently used font. The next section underneath those very slender horizontal dividers shows you the fonts that are in use on a particular layout. And then below that, you get your entire list of everything that's in your system. One of my wish list ideas for the future would be something like what we have in desktop publishing, where you could do search and replace on fonts throughout the whole system. Right now we don't have that, but you can go layout by layout and refer to this list that you see in layout mode. And then I point out that in the top navigation section, you can put a continue button. And very often, if you don't do something like this, you have to open the status toolbar in order to see the continue button in a script. And this obviates that. And finally, for WebDirect, the checkboxes and radio buttons are those peculiar, tiny little, nearly invisible items that are standard for the browsers. And what I like to do is hide them underneath a bigger button that I can make the way I showed you before using the emojis, or maybe just a circular element like you see there for yes and no. And then with scripts, I can cause these things to be hidden or shown depending on what somebody clicks. Just the way it is in WebDirect, but these are much better and more understandable to users than native fields. And finally, iPhone mirroring is wonderful. If your iPhone is connected to your computer and you're on a Mac, you can bring up a new application that's been there for at least one version now called iPhone mirroring. And it allows you to do demonstrations of things that are working on your phone without having to actually point your phone at the camera and try to work with your finger backwards. You work with your keyboard and your mouse in order to push the buttons that are in the iOS device. So I'm showing you here an example of an app that I keep in my phone to keep track of my monthly driving mileage. Obviously, you can see in Colorado, I'm not driving very much these days, but that's the way it became after the pandemic. Everything's getting delivered at home. But anyway, if I wanted to show this to somebody, I could turn on iPhone mirroring when I'm in a Zoom session, and it makes it very easy to demonstrate what something looks like in iOS. That is the end of what I had to show you today. I could do questions, and Tom.
Yes, good presentation. Question about the SMTP repeating field you're using. Would the global variable expose the password being used for the email?
A local variable would
Go ahead and repeat the question.
Boy, it's hard for me to translate the question. You're saying that would a local variable expose the data?
No, the global variable will expose it.
A global variable wouldn't expose it to the user. It would just be in the script that they're using. If they had a data viewer.
If you put it in the data viewer.
Yes, in the data viewer, that's true. They'd be able to see it.
So what are you doing to protect that?
I take my chances.
Thank you.
Hi, Heather.
I have a couple questions. One comment and a question. So the example that you gave about the value list
Right.
and that sort of thing, virtual value lists will do the same thing, but you have to have a virtual list table and you have to look up and get Jeremy's virtual value list. But I find that works really well because you can, and you use SQL to populate, like you said, to populate the value list, but you create, I won't get into all the details, but basically you can fire it off as you enter the field, and your list is instantly
And it's there instantly, right.
It's there instantly. I use that in one of our big solutions for selecting a specific budget line because every single one of over 2,000 people has their very own specific budget lines, so everyone is different. So populate it with a SQL call on entry to the field, and it's just there, and then on exit, it triggers it to clear. So you can accomplish the same thing, but it takes some schema.
It's a very elegant way to do what I hope we can do in a simpler
It
fashion
would be
someday in the
great-
future.
It would be great if it could be defined by a calculation automatically.
Because one of the benefits of Execute SQL is that you don't have to create unnecessary table occurrences
Exactly,
in order
exactly.
to make it work.
So the other thing I have, this is a question, and this is about your window positioning. I was just sharing with Eric this morning a conundrum that I've come across. I'm building a new app for a client, and I'm using a splash screen, and I'm using basically the exact same calcs that you shared for the positioning. So my splash screen comes up, yay size, in the middle of the screen, stays up there for a few seconds, and then it goes to the dashboard. Really nice, really clean, except that I work with a laptop and a monitor. It does not matter from which screen I open FileMaker and open that app. It gets the size of my window from the big monitor, but it opens it on the little one. So what ends up happening is I open the file, and the splash screen comes up in the lower right corner of my laptop, which had that been superimposed on my big monitor, would in fact be the center of the big window. If I move my window then to the big monitor, and I just rerun the script, it'll position it correctly. So it's actually getting my screen size from my secondary monitor, but it's opening it in the little one. Have you come across that, and do you have a solution? Other
Yes,
than
I have.
changing which is my primary
Yeah,
window.
I have come across that. I don't have a solution better than what you just described. Sometimes if the splash screen you described was not automatically dismissed and I move it, then the subsequent action will respect wherever it was.
Right.
There was a sneak preview the other day that we all got to listen to if we were Claris partners, and I've heard a variety of things that have to do with Windows. So again, crossing my fingers, that will be one of them.
Okay.
Dennis, thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen and ladies.
I'm Taylor Sharpe, and we're going to just continue some tips and tricks. I'm going to go through some things. These are just basically more intermediate type things that hopefully everybody knows about, but if they haven't, hopefully it's reminders of things. One thing I will say that I do a lot, we've just heard ClickSend from Dennis, but of course I don't have quite the adverse relationship with Twilio that Dennis does, but obviously there are different ways to send text messaging. One thing I will tell you that if you're having to manage a bunch of servers, particularly I've got some clients that have Mac servers, and I would like to know when anybody logs into that server to mess around on it onto the operating system. So one thing I commonly do is I will set up FileMaker little local document on there, and I will set up, if you'll go into the system settings and say open it, log in, the FileMaker Pro, and I'll tell FileMaker Pro in the settings to automatically open this local file, and it just runs a script that sends me a text message. I know whenever someone logs into one of my servers, so I know if my clients are messing around on it. And so it's just a useful thing. So if you're like me, obviously there's more sophisticated ways to do this, but this is my way of saying, when has my client or someone else that I'm sharing this server management with being logged into the operating system and possibly messing around or doing something? Because invariably clients will say, I didn't do anything, but yeah, famous last word. So that's one of the things I like to do. I will mention something on finds and searches. Of course, find, search, where, depending on what you want to call it. FileMaker is famous for doing loose finds, where if you're used to the ecosystem, everything is loose. If you search for Sharpe, S-H-A-R-P, it finds S-H-A-R-P-E, it finds Sharpless, it finds anything. And it's a nice way to get used to it, but if you're used to SQL, it's the opposite of that. It's exactly what you search for, down to capitalization. Depending on what you're used to, we're used to doing loose finds, but make sure that you also make use of the equals and equals for finding exact searches. probably the most common one that I run into beginners that are new to FileMaker. They say, I'm trying to search for an email and I can't find it. It's because the @ symbol is one of the option characters. So if you put an equals or equals equals in front of it, you'll find your emails. Remember to do that if you're trying to search for things that have special characters in there. Another common thing is you can do a find. I can find, say, all the companies that are in Texas. And now I've got a found set of maybe there are 1,000 companies in the country. I do Texas, and there are 100 companies in Texas. One thing that people often forget about is there's constrain and extend. So if I got my 100 Texas things, I can constrain that again. I've got that found set and say, let's constrain this to all the ones that are in Dallas. Now I could just go back and do a find of everything, just say, give me everything Texas and Dallas, and it would do the same thing. But if you do a constrain, it only looks on the found set that you have. That can be useful sometimes. Sometimes it's a performance thing. For example, your initial find might be on something, or your found set has things that take a long time to do a refind on. And so if you're like in scripting, you can do finds on things that are indexed fields first, and then do constraints for the things that are like calculations or summaries or things that are going to slow. You can end up making things more performant by using constrain and extend being the opposite. If I got all the Texas companies here and I want to add the Arkansas ones, I can do a find and then put Arkansas and say extend. Then I have all the Texas and Arkansas. So that way your found set is not the entire database, it's just the extended found set. So you can manage your extend and constraints, and sometimes it's really useful on performance when working with trying to make your systems more performant, because I'm sure nobody out there has a client that says, I want it to do more and I want it to be faster. Okay, also one other thing about the controls and the finds, I like to be able to, when I'm working through these sets, a lot of times table view, I'm trying to move between records. And the easiest way is, I've got used to a little bit when I used to use a Windows system. You hold the control down and you go arrow down and it goes to the next record, arrow up, and it moves you up and down. It's just something I got used to, and it never worked in a Mac. And finally someone told me, you have to go to the accessibilities, go to the system preferences, keyboard, and turn off that mission control, which I never want mission control automatically activating on my screen. Turn those off and suddenly your control keys now work in FileMaker. The operating system is overriding the defaults in FileMaker. The defaults really are that the control arrow up and down work, other than if you're on a Mac. So skip that. Scripting best practices, we all have them, and everybody thinks their best practice is the best way to go, but I will say just a couple of things about scripting best practices. You can use script names to make titles for sections that you're in, and in fact I almost always make the first few script names or just identifying myself as the developer, so the next person that comes in the scripts knows if they got questions or something they can get in touch with me. So I make a blank script with just my name and great script with my email, and I leave those up at the very top so that whoever next goes into scripting takes over as the next developer, they can know that it's who they would need to get in touch with if they need to, or got any questions. I use that for naming things. I will also talk about in scripts, I hate this, but some people never use an end at the end of their scripts. And everybody's like, why do you need an end at the end of the scripts? But if you're debugging and you don't have an end at the last of your script, it does that last step, and your debug doesn't give you a chance to let you do that last step before the end and see what the result is. So for debugging reasons, if nothing else, please put ends at the end of your script steps, script functions. I know it's an optional thing, but it's just one of my little quirks I always want. Another quirk I have is if you're going to set a field, set the next name field equal to Taylor. I always, in my scripts, I think scripts read a lot better if you set it as a variable first and then you set the field equal to the variable. And the reason why is if you're debugging, it's a lot easier to see that variable getting set wrong because you did something wrong in the calculation before you're setting the field. I like to always say, hey, set it as a variable and then save it as a field. And that way it helps me out in debugging. So that's just one of my little quirks to make debugging easier so that I'm not looking, why did that set field wrong? And now that it's been set, it's set in the way I didn't want it. Debugging, it helps better. Oh, another thing in scripting that helps with performance, if Every time we in FileMaker change layout, we change context. FileMaker has to rethink the context. That's slow. If you try to minimize the contextual changes, things work faster. So one thing that can also help in performance stuff is if you're going to switch layout, say go to layout in FileMaker, before you do it, enter find mode, particularly if you're going to go to find when you go to that layout. Do enter find mode and then go to layout so that when it switches context, it's not having to think about any records, because if you're in find mode, there are no records for it to think about. So do find, then layout change. Okay. Also, if you're not totally in love with the while function since version 18 like I am, use while instead of looping. While is much faster than looping script steps, just much more performant. I love while. What's our next thing? Debugging. FileMaker has an interesting way of showing what it thinks you need to see, and I wish we had more control over that. But basically, it looks at whatever layout you're in, any field that it's having to think about, including fields that are being used, for example, by a conditional formatting or something. You may not actually see it in the layout. It's going to throw those in there. And of course, the more fields in the debugger, it thinks through everything in the debugger before it refreshes your user interface, which means stepping through the script, you can get awful slow. I really wish the debugger would run in its own thread and just be updated as you go along, that you didn't have to wait for it to refresh before you can go to the next record. Please hear that, Claris. I keep bothering you, Rick, about it. It doesn't. And it's also, I would really like if the debugger lets you click on fields to tell it to quit thinking about this field. Particularly, I don't know how many people have summary list fields, and suddenly you found out summary list fields show up in debuggers, and it totally ruins the performance when you suddenly found 150,000 records, and you're like, list, stop, I don't need the list. So debugger. Also, if you haven't figured out and you're an intermediate person, debugger is not just for debugging scripts. The debugger also lets you create calculations and test calculations before you put them, and say, into a set variable or set field or whatever. So certainly do those kind of things if you can. And then other thing, debugging, if you're not using the call stack, realize how that works, and then pause on error. Debugger is wonderful. I just wish we could have some more control over it, and I'm sure Claris will hopefully give it to us soon. Schema, every developer has their way of doing their schema. I will say, if you're going to work with other systems and do integration stuff, if you're doing funky characters, if you're using spaces and you're using exclamation marks and stuff like that, other systems are not going to, particularly SQL systems. SQL systems also don't like you to lead with a number, so don't name fields and tables with weird things. But we're getting into AI right now, so I will say that as we're doing AI is going to be able to analyze our tables to help us to do things better in the future. So I'm going to say, name your fields real simple. Go down to the comments. You can even use JSON down there. But in the future, FileMaker is going to be able to read those comments and pass that to an AI to help us. That's the direction they're going right now, to be able to further things. So if you want to have additional information about a field, try not to put it all in the field name. You can keep the field name simple, and then go down in the comments and give all your additional explanations down there, and that will be able to be consumed by AIs for future, getting ready for more of the AI manipulation of our schema that's supposed to be coming in future versions of FileMaker, hopefully real soon here. Okay, how many people use camel case? And for some reason, a lot of people in the SQL world like to have table names can begin with caps, but field names always begin with lowercase, and then I use camel case for everything after. That's just a convention out there. If you stick to the same convention in your system, it'll make it good. As long as you stick to the same as the one, it's whenever you have 5 different developers in there and everybody had a different convention, it always makes it entertaining, but I'm sure none of you have ever seen that before. Also, go out to your relationship graph, add comments. You can add the little text thing that lets you put comments around and further explain joins and table occurrences and why you had them there. Those are useful. By the way, license FM cert, some of you as developers have to manage a bunch of customers, and what I do is on the license certs, it's just a JSON. So I, a lot of times, go into the JSON, it's got the token and whatnot in there, but it doesn't have the useful things I want to know. Who is the customer? How many licenses is it for? What's their contract number? What's their order number? And I just go add that as the JSON in the license cert, and that way I leave that on the license that I distribute to my clients. And that way, if there's any issue, I can quickly figure out what contract number we're dealing with if I got to go talk to the Claris people. Who am I script? Most of us have some type of who am I script that says, what's your IP, what's your account name, what's your privilege set name? Those are real nice. There's a nice little feature in there that you can also figure out the latency, where you can ping the server and it figures out the latency between your FileMaker Pro and your server. And that's, since FileMaker, if you don't already know, is often passes lots of small packets. It's not like video where large packets are going. So since it's very chatty is a good way to describe it. And so the reality is latency, since there's so many small packets going back and forth, latency is more important than bandwidth many times for FileMaker. So that's why I throw that in my who am I script. But I usually make it as the first thing in the list of visible scripts, so that my customers, when they tell me, I don't know who I'm logged in as, I'm just going to go up, hit Control 1 or F1 or go up to scripts and run that first script. And even though I know they're idiots, I shouldn't call my clients idiots, but sometimes I feel they are. Okay, we're running out of time, so I'm going to skip this, but we've got, for those of you who haven't ever done, you can query the FileMaker schema. If you haven't done this before, but you can make SQL calls that return table occurrences, table names, base table names, field types, the modifications, the reps, but it's really useful for determining things. You can actually, if you have plugins, you can actually do things where you can actually add fields automatically to FileMaker. But hopefully more of that's coming as AI is going to be able to do more in the future. But querying virtual schema is very useful for quite a number of record things. If you want to know more about that, I do a bunch of that in my audit logging. Come to Full Access this summer, where Chris Conger and I are going to fight it out over whose system is the best. It'll be a fun session. Okay, if anybody's ever wants to know who all the FileMaker partners are, I've got an app I can send you. Claris doesn't like it. They don't like me web scraping their web page, even though it's publicly out on the web page, and they wouldn't let me put it in the marketplace, but they will let Brian Hamm, where are you, Brian, put it out in the Apple one, but they won't let me put it in the Claris Partners one. If you're ever interested, it has the partner rankings if you're ever interested where your partner rankings are. Okay, hopefully that'll, question in the back, Dennis?
Just something to add to what you were saying about finding one of your first slides. Going all the way back to FileMaker version 1 or even before version 1, it still exists today. You completed the find, you're satisfied with it. Then if you go to script workspace and do perform find, it remembers whatever you have done to perform that find. And if you don't want to write those scripts every time your client has come up with an idea for a new find, just teach them how to use saved finds, and then they can create their own.
Brian Hamm, come up and amaze us on OData.
Sweet. All right, hello, my name is Brian. I'm an engineer here at Harmonic, a little over 3 years now. My typical dev environments are FileMaker, obviously, Swift and Python. So as far as FileMaker, that goes all the way back to version 4. So I have seen some things. Somewhere back there, I spent 10 years as an indie dev, which was great because it gave me a lot of opportunities to integrate FileMaker with other tech stacks and services, which is what we're going to talk about here. OData is a great way for you to extend FileMaker to pretty much anything that can make an API call. So we're a little short on time, so I'll probably make some editorial decisions here on the fly, but here's a bird's eye view. First, what is OData? Like literally, where did it come from? Next, what's the use case over using something else, like the data API? And then I'll walk you through how to take apart and simplify a really complex OData query. So first off, how did we get here? In the before times, there was something called Lasso. Claris repackaged a subset of that and named it Claris Dynamic Markup Language, or CDML. Some of you may have used it. You could use that to extend FileMaker out to the web. I probably wrote tens of thousands of lines of CDML, and I probably still haven't aversion to square brackets because of it. Later, CDML got replaced with the PHP API. This was much better, but it's not RESTful, so a little give and take. Then we got the Data API, which is our first RESTful API. It was still proprietary, but I was so excited about it that I ended up creating SwiftFM, which is a Swift package that wraps the Data API, and then I used that to build a couple of FileMaker apps, or FileMaker-backed iOS apps, and put those in the App Store, as Taylor mentioned a minute ago. And more recently, we have OData. It's an open standard, so kudos for that, and quite a bit more capable than the Data API. Claris likes it so much that they're seemingly baking it into everything these days. Yeah, this could just as easily say, is this Claris Connect? Is this Claris MCP? Is this webhooks? If you've talked to the right people in the last year or so, you may have heard rumors about ODBC being one of the next candidates to benefit from OData. Not sure how far Claris is on that, but point is, OData is everywhere, or it will be soon. So Microsoft developed Open Data Protocol, or OData, through the late aughts. Lots of APIs use JSON payloads to encode the requests, the filters, sorts, and so on. In OData, that's done with URL parameters. There's still a few cases where you'll pass a JSON object, but that's for stuff like creating records or patching records. Then in the mid-2010s, the protocol itself got standardized with the OASIS group, and that was followed by the JSON response structure becoming an ISO standard. The OData spec is massive. Claris has good support for the common use cases. There's some things in there that are going to be missing from the Claris implementation, so just be aware of that. These are some of the core building blocks that you'll use to write an OData request. This is not exhaustive and certainly not mutually exclusive. In fact, you'll probably combine several of these in order to fetch the data that you want. A complex OData request can be intimidating to look at, much less write, but no matter how complicated it looks, you can always reduce it down to its individual components. We'll see a pretty ominous request later, but you'll be able to deconstruct it. First off, the metadata parameter is what you use to get to know a system. Maybe it's a third-party system you're connecting to for the first time, or maybe it's one of your own and you just want to interrogate the database a little bit. You can interrogate files, tables, fields, field types, value lists, and some other stuff. This is the kind of thing you get back from the Data API, which most of you have probably seen by now. One difference that I want to call out immediately, though, is that unlike the Data API, OData can act on records using any field that's been flagged as unique in the field options. These will appear in the keys array in the metadata response. You can still use the record ID if you want for operations, but it's not necessary. And record ID isn't unique across files, as we all know, so it's nice to be able to use something like a UUID field. That makes a little more sense. In the middle of this metadata response, you'll see artists. The kind key says entity type, so it's a table. The key array right below that contains any fields that were marked as unique in the field options. The row ID won't appear here. It's always available, but you can still use it in a request. There just might be times where it's easier to use an identifier that's a little more meaningful, like an invoice number would work, a social security number would work, etc. If it's available in keys, you can use it to fetch or edit a record. Then we have top and optionally skip. These are just ways of limiting how much data we get back. Maybe you just want to see the 5 newest records, or maybe you have a lot of records and you can use skip to iterate over a large set like that. Stuff like this is in most APIs, nothing too extraordinary about that. Count returns an int as the response. So no JSON, no keys, no brackets, no field names, just a number. You can use count by itself to count all the records in a table, but that's boring. Most of the time, you'll use it along with something like the filter parameter. Basically, don't fetch a giant array of records just so you can count them. That's silly. Select is another key difference between the Data API and OData. Let's say you've got a table with 40 columns, but you're only interested in 3 of them. In the Data API, you'd have to create a separate layout with just those 3 fields, right? Because only fields on the layout get returned. In OData, you don't talk to a layout, you talk to the base table. And you tell it which fields you want, and that's exactly what you get back. Which also means this part of the URL could be dynamic. If the different parts of a web app needed to request a user-defined set of fields, for instance, right? So that's pretty cool. And once again, you can and probably will chain this together with other parameters. Filter is a really important one. This is our predicate, right? In the data API, you describe things like filters, sorts, and omits by passing in the JSON object. In OData, the filter is right there in the URL. And there are tons of operators that you can use. There's EQ for equality. Besides just being good for filtering data, you can use EQ to define a relationship, even if those tables aren't connected on the graph. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. There's operators for greater than, less than, equals, greater than, equals to. There's probably a dozen of those. There's contains, where you pass in the field name and a substring. And then there's in. This is more recent, but it's really nice. It's new to OData for the Claris implementation. So maybe you have a bunch of conditions and you don't want to write some kind of nonsense like filter, name equals this value, or name equals some other value, etc. So just throw all those values in a comma delimited list and then use in. It's much better. If you're just fetching one record and you only need a single field from that record, then there's some shorthand syntax available for that. You don't even need the select. Just append the name of the field after the record identifier there. And speaking of identifiers, I was referring to this a minute ago. To act on a record, use the record ID or any other field from the keys array and put that in the parentheses immediately after the table name. No slash before the identifier. After we do our request, what does our response look like? OData gives us back this nice super clean structure. In this example, I'm returning artist records and some related data from the event artist join table. It's got a filter on Brian for the name, and I used an expand to include the event data. The easiest way to think about expand is basically you use it when you need to use more than one select statement. And you'll see one of those in a minute. So this is super easy to deal with and parse. In the data API, I would also have a separate object for metadata and a separate portal array for related records. That's at least 3 things that I would have to traverse, and this is just one, nice and flat. This is about as advanced as we're going to get today. We'll have another FMPug session maybe next month or the month after on some more advanced topics. We're not going to write a cross join right now, but I'll show you an example from one of our production apps. The insert from URL requests that I had to write for that app were just nasty. Cross joins across 3 different tables. Each table had multiple filters, multiple selects. It's a mess, but you're going to be able to read it with what I've already shown you. Are you ready to see it? Right. Yeah, ignore the bullets on this slide. It's not a list. This is a single OData call from the app from one of the many sync-related scripts. Tables and fields have been redacted to protect the innocent. Put each component on its own line, though, to help you work through it with me. So first, the cross join has 3 tables defined. I'm going to reiterate, these do not need to be connected on the graph, which is crazy. We define the relationship right in the request. And we do that with a filter. This filter looks a little complicated, but that's because I'm prepending the field names with the table name. I'm being explicit about which table the field's coming from, because joining multiple tables can sometimes result in naming collisions. Prepending the table name takes care of that. So it's a little bit like SQL that way. If your field names are all unique, you don't need to do this, but it can be helpful for your future self when you come back months later and you don't remember which of the 3 tables a field came from. Next is our expand. Expand is just a logical container that holds SQL statements. That's the sort of the easiest way I can put it. One select for each table. And we all know how to do a select now, right? So the rest of these are pretty self-explanatory. This app fetches tens of thousands of records, and so we organize the OData call into batches of 5,000 and put that all in a loop. On each iteration, we incremented the skip to pick up the next set of records. Format, lastly, we didn't talk about, but it's an important feature in OData. For this app, we had to return XML. It wasn't negotiable. But OData can also return JSON, of course, and even HTML. And so what, or more importantly, who, does all this joining statements remind you of? Schoolhouse Rock fans, thank you for the laugh. You're my people. So we're just connecting parameters. If you know the song, you should sing it when you build your queries. It's more fun that way. Or you can take the concept in reverse and use it to break down complex queries like the one we just looked at. If you've tried OData in the past and were confused or intimidated by it, don't be. Give it another try. Even if you don't write API calls yourself, it's still part of the wiring for Claris Studio, Claris Connect, Claris MCP, webhooks, and probably ODBC at some point. Claris is putting this stuff everywhere now. So do yourself a solid and learn it. It's a great API. Real quick, some OData sources. Obviously start with the Claris docs. They're a little light for OData, but you can definitely get something started with that. If you're curious, check out the full docs from the Oasis site. It gives you an idea of just how much OData is capable of. And obviously be aware parts of that are not going to be supported by Claris, but a lot of things like the list of operators and such, all that stuff is in the Oasis documentation. And there's a lot of it. Then there are some desktop apps that make it super simple to test and build up your OData calls. I like Rapid API. The Postman works too. You might have your own favorite. Or you can just skip the apps entirely and tack format HTML to the end of the URL and stick that in a web browser. That's a little too lo-fi for me, but you can certainly do it. Stay tuned for our next OData session, maybe next month, maybe the month after. That'll be more advanced. We'll talk about using OData to create schema, create tables, create fields, delete tables, delete fields. So that'll be scary. We'll talk about table and field identifiers, which abstracts away the field names from the response, the keys that come back in the response, and they're replaced with the numeric equivalent of the table or field ID. And we'll go hands-on with cross joins. We'll actually write one. So we'll talk about scripts, which we didn't mention today, didn't have time. We will post a transaction, which is an OData specific feature that uses something called batch. And we'll check out some aggregate and casting functions and probably a bunch of other stuff that I just forgot. Until next time, thank you for your attention. We will